What's going on here?
Yeah.
Wanted to know about the date.
I thought I saw Aaron's name up there.
My name's Rogers.
Yeah, I know. You know,
Okay.
boy, what was I gonna say? I was a cheap date. It's when he married.
Okay, we'll call this January 4th meeting of the Salina Planning Commission to order. Is there a motion to approve the summary minutes of the December 7th meeting?
So move.
And a second?
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None being heard, motion carries. Item number 2, public hearing items. Application SP 10-1 filed by Dolan Realty Advisors on behalf of Verizon Wireless requesting approval of a special permit, Class B, to allow construction of a monopole communication tower in a C6 heavy commercial zoning district. The subject property is the access storage site located on a portion of Lot 1, Block 1 of the Kessler addition to the City of Salina, Kansas, which is addressed as 1433 North 9th Street. Dean?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. These are two separate applications, two separate public hearing items, but they are so similar in nature that these reports may bleed into each other just a little bit. But the first item before you is an application for a special permit to construct a new wireless communication tower, and the proposed location is what is the business location of a storage facility that's on North 9th Street. And there's a little bit of an unusual situation here from the standpoint that it's kind of hard to see those gold or yellow lines there, but this property down in here is all owned by Millard Pace, and it was formerly owned by Triplet Inc., but what they did is sold it all to Mr. Pace but retained this. And because of access control on 9th Street in proximity to the levee, there's no individual driveway here, so there's an access easement that provides access through here up to this site. And so this site has frontage on 9th, but the route of access is here, and the proposed location we're talking about as a tower site is here. This is a flood control levee, Thomas Park, and then we have St. John's Military School and property they own over here. So that is the location that we are discussing. We identified on page 1 and 2 there kind of a summary of how our ordinance locally is structured, and what we are talking about is what we would refer to as a Class B permit, which the Planning Commission may approve after a public hearing. And so what we have is a Dolan Realty Advisor has been searching for suitable sites in both North and West Salina on behalf of Verizon Wireless, and it's our understanding that the need for additional tower locations is not a coverage issue but a capacity issue because of the various forms of communication and the additional traffic. Cell phones are used for beyond just cell phone purposes now with texting and other forms of wireless connections. So it's our understanding that the need for the tower is a place to add antennas to increase the coverage in Salina, Kansas. The plan is to construct a tower that would have suitable height and strength, that it could accommodate additional users if needed in the future. And there were a number of locations up and down Euclid Avenue in North Salina that were looked at, and this was the one that was selected. So this application is filed on behalf of Verizon Wireless, and the request is for a 100-foot tall tower on a lease site that's 40 feet by 60 feet, and the location would be about 500 feet west of 9th Street and about 300 feet north of Euclid. And I think we have a photo, John, do we not, of the what the site looks like?
This would be on the west side of the site looking east.
Okay, so it's back in that corner. So again, if you went back to the aerial photo, it's quite a bit of distance from Euclid to that location. So that is a summary of the request there, and under the process that the city has set up, you must conduct a public hearing to review this request and make a decision on approval or denial. But one of the requirements, if you look on page 3 of your report, is that you have the authority to hear and approve an application to construct a monopole tower up to 200 feet in height if the proposed tower will maintain a setback from adjacent property and the public right-of-way equal to or greater than the proposed height of the tower. So this does fall within the Class B category, but as we point out later in the report, it does not meet this performance standard of having a setback equal to the height of the tower. So we've summarized the basic requirements related to a tower. 2 items that we didn't address because we didn't feel like we were quite there yet. On page 5 of your report, it says parking shall be provided, and it says paid parking for use by maintenance personnel. Obviously, if you looked at the aerial photos, you can see that we have gravel there. And then it also refers to landscaping requirements. Says that a minimum landscaping shall consist of a landscape strip of not less than 10 feet in width with materials which will provide a visual barrier to a minimum height of 6 feet as approved by the city. If you're familiar with the tower out at East Crawford Recreation Area, what we have is a row of evergreen trees that are planted around the perimeter of the fenced-in compound to a height of 6 feet. Both of those items, the gravel versus paved and the landscaping, is kind of a judgment call for you based on your location and how visible and prominent you think it is. On page 6, I think the one thing we wanted to point out was that an application to construct a new tower may be denied if the applicant has not shown by substantial evidence that it has made a good faith effort to mount the facilities on an existing structure and or tower. And in order to do that, we need to know what other towers or structures had been considered and why they're not suitable. And so again, our entire ordinance is structured to discourage the construction of new towers, or at least to keep those to a minimum by saying please consider existing structures or towers first, and the construction of new towers is only done when it's not feasible at a different location or a different tower. So I'd point out a couple items that we have related to the application itself and the information you have in front of you. It's been my experience on previous applications that we have one of 3 things, which would be a requirement on any application that we have before you, and one is that the property owner either sign the application or they provide a letter indicating that the applicant has the authority to apply for this tower permit on property that they own, or that there's a signed and executed lease. In the case of the 2 school district sites at Central, the Salina Stadium, and at South, we had a letter from the school district indicating that the applicant had the authority to file those applications on property they owned. On all the other previous applications that staff has processed, there has been a lease signed by the owner, furnished to staff, indicating that authority. To staff's knowledge, we don't have anything in writing signed by representatives of the owner that says that there is authority to file and apply for this application. The other thing we do not have and cannot display for you today is an inventory and map of existing cell towers in Salina, and an explanation for you as to why Verizon cannot locate their facilities on an existing tower or structure. So again, ideally, we would have a map up here for you to review that would show you where existing towers are in and around Salina, so you could see what the gaps are in the coverage, and we do not have that for you. So from that standpoint, those are items that lead us to conclude that both you as a board and we as staff need additional information to make this a complete request. The other item I wanted to point out was, and I don't know if those tables can be blown up, John. They're difficult to read, but what we're looking at is a setback proposed of 24 feet from the south property line and 55 feet on the west, and the minimum requirement for a 100-foot tower is a 100-foot setback. And so if we had all other items complete and resolved, the one thing that you have the authority to do is make a recommendation, but you cannot approve a permit for a tower that doesn't have the 100-foot setback. If that is the final proposal, then you can make a recommendation that lesser setback be approved or denied, but the City Commission would ultimately have to decide whether any waivers or exceptions to that setback requirement should be approved. So when we looked at this, and you may have you zoom out, John, we're tucked into a corner here, and it appears to staff that if we were going to lessen any setbacks or buffers, it would be better to do it on the north side than on the south side. If I were Mr. Pace here, I would be concerned about the proximity of that tower to my property and buildings. And there are a number of rationales for that. It's not entirely concern about towers collapsing, because the monopole towers rarely collapse, but there are issues with just from aesthetic issues, maintaining a buffer. If people are concerned about electronic or electromagnetic waves, maintaining a buffer there, as well as the primary issue encountered in the city of Salina has been ice buildup and ice sheets. The first tower ever put up in Salina was at the former, it's been so many former different things, but it was a Kansas Cellular and then Alltel facility out on Graves Boulevard and Westport. And they put up a tower next to their parking lot, and also in close proximity to the travel plaza just to the south of it. And the first winter it was up, they ended up paying quite a few claims for damage to vehicles from ice that built up on the tower and then blew off and damaged vehicles around and below. So part of the reason for the setback equal to the height of the tower is not just because the tower might collapse, but there are other reasons. And if there's ice buildup or ice that might fall, it's better to have it fall on the owner's own property or in a buffer area and not on an adjoining property or improvements on that property. So from our standpoint on this particular request, we feel like some indication from the Shelda Vandervoort Trust that they have in writing agreed to this proposal. We don't need a lease finalized at this point, but certainly something in writing from the applicant indicating that they have granted authorization for this. Secondly, I don't see how we can make a recommendation or reach a decision when you can't review where other towers or potential locations are that might be an alternative to constructing a new tower. Then the question of the setbacks, and if there are alternative locations that might give us the setbacks we need. And then I think the final thing that you would need to address as a commission is how you feel about gravel versus paved parking spaces for people that are servicing this facility, and also any need for landscaping around the base of the tower. And with that, I'd be happy to address any questions you have about this particular request.
I take it there's no location that satisfies all the setback requirements? So we're looking at a waiver?
There might potentially be, but I think it's going to be more centered in here. I don't have all those dimensions right in front of me, but I think the site itself is wide enough. It's I worked with a tower over on Franklin Street where the site was 220 feet wide, and we have a 110-foot tower, and it's centered, so it's 110 feet from either of the adjoining property lines, and that's how we arrived at 110 feet, because that's as tall as they could go and maintain a 110-foot setback. So I might need some help from Dustin's sharper eyes or John's sharper eyes about the total
Looks like it's like 160 something.
width of this tract. But again, if we were going to vary a setback, it would seem to be that varying it on the north where there's the flood control levee and no improvements would be better than doing that on an adjoining property. So what does it look like, Dustin? 182 feet?
I got 160.
Okay. So it looks like the total width of the tract is 162 feet, and you would need a tract at least 200 feet wide to accommodate all that. But again, I can't speak for Mr. Pace, but it's part of the role of the ordinance and staff to look out for the adjoining owners. And it seems like if you were going to give on any setback or recommend that it would be better to do it on the north side where there's a flood control levee and a park than it would be on the south side where you've got some buildings and improvements. But I'd be happy to address any other questions. But it does look like the site is 162 feet wide.
So, Dean, just to be clear on this, so if this is a capacity issue versus a coverage issue, this could be located anywhere within Salina? I mean, are we talking about anywhere 5 miles away, 10 miles away?
Well, that's, again, the explanation comes from Verizon as to what their goal, but just for example, we've got, there's 3 antennas that are on top of the Marymount Administration Building. Nobody knows they're there because they're on the roof and they're kind of screened from view. But that's an example of placing an antenna in a tall location that doesn't require construction of a tower because you've got an existing structure to put it on. And we don't have the United building has anywhere from 5 to 6 different antenna arrays on it. There's one on top of the Kansas Wesleyan University Science building. So if the need for great height is not an issue, then those are potential alternatives. But the way our ordinance is structured is to look at all the alternatives first, and then the last resort is building a new tower. And if you do build a new tower, you need to build it so it can support other users, so that if you have competing users, they don't have to build their own tower, they can co-locate on an existing tower. So the tower on East Crawford is set up for 5 users. And it was done so that you wouldn't have other people looking for towers out in that area. They can simply put their antenna on the existing. But again, we have two issues when it comes to cellular service. One is coverage. In other words, are there spots in the community where people aren't getting good reception or service because they're in a dark hole, so to speak? And then the other issue is having enough antenna capacity to relay signals because of the busyness, the capacity of the system. So it's our understanding that these are proposed to beef up Verizon's capacity, and that these are two areas where they have gaps in their service area.
Not understanding this exactly. I understand coverage,
Mm-hmm.
but capacity, is it not just a matter of adding on the same tower another capacity enhancement?
Well, the ones that I'm aware, the towers at Central and at South are utilized. The only antenna on there today are for Verizon.
Right.
And so that's giving them they're not particularly tall towers, so if your shorter towers are generally to provide capacity as opposed to broader coverage. So that covered that area in South Salina and an area in Central Salina. Now these are being proposed to cover an area in North Salina and West Salina. So again, if we had a map to display to show you the rings, so to speak, of the coverage areas of those different towers, I think it would make more sense.
I guess I still don't. I understand a need for a tower in North Salina for coverage,
Right.
but for capacity, can you not just add additional capacity to towers that are already in place?
That would be a better question for the applicants than for staff.
Okay.
Any further questions of staff? Would the applicant care to address the commission?
Sure.
Your name and address, please.
Hi, Mike Duchat. I'm from Dolan Realty Advisors based in St. Louis, of course here on behalf of Verizon Wireless. I'm not quite so sure I'll be able to do as thorough a job as Dean did, but I'll try to duplicate it and maybe embellish a couple points. With your permission, as Dean cited, I might want to kind of combine both before focusing on this one singularly, if that's okay. These are a part of Verizon Wireless going to dramatically improve its coverage throughout central and western Kansas, so more than 40 new sites. Similar sites have gone through the zoning process, much like this particular pole. McPherson was just approved last week. We're going to be 2 new sites in Hutchinson. Manhattan will kickstart that late this month. 2 new sites in Newton. So I would kind of compare it to, these 2 new sites to the situations we've got in Hutchinson and Newton, similar sized communities. And as your network matures, we might as well get right to this coverage versus capacity issue. Each site can only hold so many calls, even with enhanced equipment. And it gets a little more complicated as years go by because, as Dean cited, the wireless industry has gone far beyond just, say, cell phones. Since each site can only hold so many calls in the first place, and then you add this high-speed data transmission and people being on for an extended period, it kind of ties up the line, almost like going back 30, 40 years. It's almost like a party line. So we don't want to go back to that period where you might remember about 10, 12, 15 years ago where you had a more pronounced level of drop calls and not being able to get through and that. So we feel like we've really addressed that issue, especially in the last decade. But now you gotta be proactive in terms of dealing with that, and you know, as your customer base increases, where you need to be to meet the demand to keep everybody functioning properly. Now, I hope that wasn't an oversimplification, but we're still a line of sight business too. So when the industry started, you generally speaking, you had those great big tall guide towers, about 15 miles apart. Then a few years later, they came down. They're still guide towers, but they're down about 250 to 300 feet, about 7.5, 8 miles apart. Then a couple years later, you know, the increments keep going down, 220, 200. Then you go from the guide towers to the self-support. Then it's 180, 150, 120. So the networks have matured to the point to where now, generally speaking, in a decent-sized community that needs service, wants service, and for us to meet the demand, we're kind of at the 100-foot level. A couple years from now, you'll split the difference again, and it'll probably be at the 80 or 60-foot level. So that's again, I hope that sequence kind of explains what's necessary to have a quality network. Without downgrading, say, some competitors, some still go tall, blast away, but that's not a mature network that doesn't really meet the demand, especially in this era of high-speed data transmission. In this case, you know, with the monopoles, I'd like to also reinforce we've provided a fall zone study for a generic, a previously built monopole, which shows that a monopole in a worst case situation, you know, doesn't fall over like a tinker toy. It kinks and kind of collapses upon itself, similar to aluminum foil. So if one of your conditions to address that issue, especially in light of the setback issues that Dean acknowledged, you know, if you want conditions for site specific, we'd be happy to do that. We just haven't gotten to that point yet to where we can generate that from the tower manufacturer, in as much as we haven't even gotten you know, soil sample, which we don't do until we, you know, get a sense that this is going to work. You just don't want to go to that expense unless you get approvals to get to that point. So I hope I've kind of addressed reasons why, you know, we feel comfortable with the setbacks, even though it's not perfect, and the height of the poles as we're coming down. The capacity issue again is primarily due to the high-speed data transmission. And in this, well, in both sites, but you might want to pass this floodplain map around to kind of show how we were within the search area, how we were hemmed in by the floodplain, because we can't build a site in the floodplain. So this shows the floodplain and how we were kind of hemmed in, and we really didn't have the best alternatives in the world. And we're going to go to meet the exact center of the search area, and we understand that things don't always work perfectly. The center of the search area was north in the floodplain. So we went to what looked like the most reasonable, but yet out of the way place to go. Within that specific compound, that was more of a preference of the property owner in terms of the corner to utilize, due to the normal flow of traffic for his existing storage unit customers. It just made more sense to put it in that corner versus the other. We understand if there's, you know, it's his property, not ours. So we're not in the business in strong arming. You know, that was his preference, so that's where it was designed. We feel comfortable with it in as much as the property, I think you can even see right there. It's basically, as I recall, just pretty much just junk vehicles to the south there. So I don't believe there was anything of substance there that could be affected.
Not today.
That's correct.
Okay.
And again, you know, if that's one of the conditions or whatever, you know, of course, we'll have to, from our point of view, we'll have to run it past the property owner, because again, it's his property, not ours. I don't sense that that would be a big issue if that becomes a hot button issue, but I really can't speak for him
Mr.
at this
Deshawn,
point. Sure.
I'm not trying to derail your presentation here. I think probably a concern of the board and myself is how the fact that our statutes try to eliminate, or not eliminate, but to keep at a minimum the proliferation of towers. Have you looked at other sites that are high in terms of like elevators, stuff like that? Is there other sites that could be utilized that would do the same thing without us building another structure?
Well, the search area, again, as the towers come down in height, it's all pretty much location, location, location to connect the dots properly to existing sites. Again, in this case, there was nothing within this, what we call our search area, to the best case scenario, just to the north. There were no existing structures. Naturally, we do go out of our way to look at existing structures to possibly go on if it makes sense, because it's just a dramatic cost savings. To build a site such as this, it's several $100,000 that you could avoid a substantial amount of that by going on an existing structure. And in this case, we did pursue as a candidate and to run it past engineering. There was an existing tower about 1.5 miles to the south as the crow flies. Again, I apologize for not having that address. And the name,
There's
kind
a
of an
tower
industrial.
there's a tower on Front Street that is just north of North Street by the railroad tracks.
Yeah.
There. It's east of Ohio and north of North Street on Front Street in the Northeast Industrial Park area. That is the northernmost tower in the city limits that I'm aware of.
Yeah, so that was the one that the closest existing tower that, you know, made any sense at all if RF could live with it, and they didn't look fondly upon it at all. Again, we were, if you saw on that floodplain map, we were really kind of hemmed in by the levee, by residential, by floodplain, and due to the natures of the existing parcels that were as close as reasonably possible to the search area that worked best. Apologize for not having what we call propagation maps to really dwell on some of the points that Dean brought up. We could provide those, again, to show existing coverage versus the way this particular site would enhance the network surrounded by the existing sites that have already been. It's not all just capacity. It's a reflection of capacity, but it's also a coverage. In terms of landscaping, I think the photos kind of showed that landscaping would further impede the normal flow of traffic as you make the oval turn around the self-storage facility. So again, if that's a requirement, I guess we could come up with something, but I think, to be honest, I think the actual property owner would almost kind of like frown upon it in terms of, you know, just the normal flow of business and what transpires there daily. Having such a landscape, maybe there's some way to have landscaping on a couple sides, or again, if that's a hot button issue, it doesn't matter to us. But again, we were just reflecting the concerns of the property owner. In terms of traffic, after a site is constructed, it's not a high traffic item for us. Our operations technician shows up about once a month, kind of like a meter reader. Checks the equipment for a few minutes, away they go. Beyond that, I think, well, in terms of authorization, we can provide In this case, we're close to signing the lease. We could provide the redacted lease. I apologize for not sending the property owner to the office here and have them sign it or acknowledge it in some way. We've got like I said, over 40 of these going on, and I've done that for quite a few, so that it's been done. It just fell through the cracks in this specific case.
What is the property to the west of the fence?
That's also owned by Mr. Pace. And
You didn't pursue any other property right here?
No, you try to spread it around because in terms of, because you don't know for sure, say in this case where the other Salina site was going to be.
Well, I mean right here at this site only.
are you referring to back
Yeah,
in here?
right.
Yes, well, as I understand it, upon our research, I believe the property owner is out of state, and we acknowledge it. You know, we just, to be honest, we can't keep chasing rabbits. You know, we tried to nurture contact, tried to get some feedback, see if anybody had any warm and fuzzies, if it's something they might want to pursue, and it just never really. We had a really ready, willing, and able landlord right there. You know, it just reaches a point of diminishing returns.
Mr. Pace resides in Colorado, has properties and business interests here, but does reside in Colorado. So.
You didn't ask it.
Right.
That's what I'm
Right.
hearing, right?
No,
They
what?
didn't ask the basis, or they didn't respond to whatever.
Yeah, we sent communication to them. We never heard back from them.
Just for clarification on the floodplain issue, and that is a problem in our town, we know that. There are some, appear to be some towers built in floodplain areas. If you go north of Salina, you go east of Salina, you see them on piers. Is that possible with Verizon towers? It's just a little more costly, isn't it?
Well, first off, it's more than a little, and as environmental issues have, the intensity of those type of things have really escalated over the years, it really becomes a drawback on trying to do it. Is it possible? Yes, you could build it up and put it up on 10-foot piers, but that's certainly not your initial objective or what you want to do, not only environmentally, but also, again, cost considerations.
Yeah, the South High Tower is in the floodplain, and the way that that is addressed is that not the tower itself per se, but any electrical or switching equipment that might be in an equipment building, that has to be elevated, and we have the same situation out on Graves Boulevard. So it's not, from floodplain management standpoint, it's more about the electrical equipment and switching equipment that's in the equipment shelter more so than the tower itself. And the other difference is north of the levee there is floodway as opposed to floodplain, so it is a little more complicated outside the levee than inside.
That was the reason for my question, because logically, if you would let it, quite an open space out there, which is floodplain, whatever.
From an
Floodway
environmental
escalates.
standpoint, it would be more complicated to do something in the floodway than the floodplain.
Any further questions, Mr. Deschamps?
I would say, in lieu of landscaping, there may be some compromise there, whether it be slats in the fence, or, I mean, there's any number of things that could be done.
Dean, I have one more question for you. Do we have an idea of how many towers there is in Salina right now?
Yeah, again, that would be a part of the propagation study or map, but while we were sitting here, I was jotting down the ones that I'm aware of, and I don't have the exact heights, but the first tower that was done before there was any type of ordinance in place and was done as a Board of Zoning Appeals variance was over there on Graves Boulevard, and I believe the height over there is roughly 175 feet, but I'm not for sure on that. On Enterprise Drive, which is south of Vanderbilt's and Fastenal, south of Schilling Road, there's a tower there, and that tower was constructed in the county, and the city inherited it, but it is now inside the city limits. The tower at East Crawford Recreation Area was put up in 2002, and it's 225 feet tall. And it is not a monopole. It was actually designed to be taller and have additional capacity to try to reduce the idea that there was a need for additional towers in that area. So it was purposely built taller and stronger to hold up to 5 users. There's a 110-foot tower at Franklin, which is just to the, it's along the railroad tracks, and that would be just to the east of Broadway there. It's difficult to see or find because it's 110 feet tall. And there's a 200-foot tower on Front Street, north of North Street, east of Ohio. And those are the freestanding towers that I'm aware of inside the city of Salina. And then we have the last 2 that were just approved, both of which are up now at Central High, the stadium site, and South High, the field site out there. So both of those towers are up, and I would suggest that particularly the one at South High would be similar, if not identical, to what is being proposed here. But if I count those up, I come up with 7 freestanding tower locations in the city of Salina, and again, the United Building, the Marymount Administration Building, and the Science Building out at Kansas Wesleyan University are other locations where antennas have been mounted other than on towers, as to what I'm aware of personally. But by my count, there are 7 individual towers within the city limits at this time.
Thank you.
I just find it hard to believe that the industry has not figured out a way to add capacity and coverage. What's a little alarming to me is this is only going to get worse. And I understand that the pole heights are coming down, which will help. But at what point do you stop in the community from having these and we're a small place.
Well, I was going back and rereading all of because it's difficult, if not impossible. It's not the same as signs, but it's somewhat a similar thing in that the technology or the anticipated usage changes faster than we had no ordinance. Then in 1998 we adopted a new ordinance. We determined in 2001 that it didn't really work based on changes that were occurring in the industry, and even since when all these standards were adopted in 2001, all the various uses that are being described for phones and almost constant usage and wireless connections and connections to internet and use of photos and videos and texting and all that just simply weren't anticipated. So what we did report in 2001 was that, and this was when you had cellular service and then PCS, which was a variation of that, but we reported at the time that what we anticipated seeing was that exactly what Mr. Duchant described. Instead of having broad, tall towers spaced apart, that the network was going to get denser, and you'd have almost what we described as repeater towers, or towers that you didn't need a whole series of towers 250 feet tall, but you were going to need to fill in the network with density. And again, all we've asked, and again, that's why the propagation maps are valuable for you as commissioners and us as staff, because what a propagation map is it shows the location of all the existing towers, and then it shows the ring or coverage area of those towers. And then as you look at that, and that came up in the case of the tower on Franklin was there because at the time the service providers basically had a dead spot in that part of West Salina, and they weren't getting good service there at all. And the reason for the tower at East Crawford was the same reason: inadequate coverage or service in that part of town. And that was shown by those propagation maps that say, here's the existing towers, here's the extent of the area that those towers can cover and serve. And so what we basically ask here in the North 9th Street location and the other is, are there other suitable locations or structures where you could either co-locate an antenna on an existing structure, which the closest one here is on Front Street, and or a other suitable structure. We do want to point out that the City of Salina does not allow antennas on our water towers. So water towers are not acceptable locations as in terms of locating antenna on an existing structure. So we've had inquiries over the years about that, and if you could do that, you probably wouldn't have a tower at South High. You'd have it on the water tower at Magnolia and Belmont, but the City of Salina does not want antennas on its water towers. So that is something that eliminates at least one type of existing structure. But that's, again, that's why we think the propagation maps would be helpful, because that demonstrates this is the hole, this is the gap that we're trying to cover with this location. And there is a cost to building towers, and I would be hard-pressed to say what the alternative tall structure would be in this area to mount an antenna on. But I would agree that due to the changes in the industry, this is going to become more frequent, not infrequent. So, but again, I believe that our locational preferences that we have and the requirements to construct monopole towers and all those things are designed to make these as visually inobtrusive as we can. And our first preference is always going to be for camouflaging, and that worked well at Salina Stadium. I don't know that we have anything here in the way of bell towers, light towers, things like that, where you can camouflage a tower and an antenna, like a church steeple or things of that nature. But we're certainly open to ideas in that way. But all I can say is that, for instance, the City of Manhattan waited to see what Salina adopted and then imitated it, and the same with other cities like McPherson and Newton. So I would say that the requirements we have are probably similar to those communities, because they modeled what they did after what we adopted.
Setback requirement. We've got a tower that's sitting next to a property owner that hasn't given approval for that setback.
Mr. Deschamps, I have a question. Is there your coverage map, is that something you can access online?
We'll provide that as,
Well, I mean,
whether it's tabled or, and the communities that were cited here, they all had propagation maps. To be honest, in fact, I took a quick glance at the ordinance again, and maybe I'm as dumb as I look, but I just didn't see, I could see where propagation maps are always useful. I just didn't see the specific request for it, or else it would have been a part of the application, and I apologize for that.
no, I just thought if it's something you could access online, John might be able to get it.
No, it has to be worked on by the engineer, because in terms of addressing some of your concerns, there's also what we call a justification memo that goes with it to give it some context.
I see.
Yeah, usually you'll have something from their RF engineer to say, this is why we zeroed in on this location. From an engineering standpoint, that's why we've zeroed in on this location, and why the alternate location won't work. And Dustin can amplify on this, but Dustin actually met with Mr. Pace, because after we sent out the property owner notification letters, Mr. Pace got the letter and then came in to talk to Dustin, but his concern was not about the tower location or setbacks. His concern was about how the tower people were going to get access to the site. And so we've had discussions in that way, but he still has issues with this access easement, but it is a legal, legitimate, recorded access easement that guarantees users of this property the right to drive across what is Mr. Pace's property to get there. So, and Dustin even wrote a letter to Mr. Pace explaining that. But so he's not unreachable. But from my standpoint, I would tend to agree with Mr. Kennedy that I would feel better having something from Mr. Pace that says he's reviewed the location of the tower, he knows it's closer to his property than 100 feet, but it's not a concern to him. If we had that, I would feel much better about varying the setback, because while it's true that the Vandervoort Trust, this is their property, and they've got a say on how and where it's located there. We also have neighbors who are impacted, and again, Mr. Pace is aware of it. He didn't say yay or nay. I'm not sure. He's been focused on that access easement for a number of years, and so that was his first and only question. But we could certainly try to follow up with him. We know how to contact him and see how he feels about that setback. I think it would make you feel better, and it would make staff feel better if we knew he understood what that was, and if he was able to state he had no objections to that location. That would stand us in a lot better position. And also, if it is true that these become more frequent, from a precedent standpoint, getting a knowledgeable sign-off from the owner most affected by the setback, I think, would be helpful.
Okay, as this is a public hearing, we will take public comment at this time.
Well, I am partial owner of Access Storage. I'm Tom Vandervoort. And the site, I have no problem with him building there at all. We can get it in writing if you'd like. And about the position of that, this side is a lot better, because when a semi goes in there, goes around the circle, they have to back out, because if you look on the east side here, they cannot get out. They have to back all the way out, and the easiest way is for them to back into that open space there and pull forward around this way.
You want to show the movements
Good
with
luck.
that.
I can go up here, can I? What the semis do, they come in over here, come around here. I don't get a lot in there. and I've had them back in here before. There's a light post here, and there's not room here for them to get through. So they have to back up. And what they've done before is they back up their hill into here, and they pull out forward just like that. And that's why I wanted it on this side. Plus, there's more room on this side. But they do have the approval of us, and we can get it in writing if you'd like.
Any other comments?
Nope.
Any questions for the property owner? Thank you. Anyone else care to address this application? Please, and we need your name and address, please.
Paula Webster.
Go ahead. Yeah. Come up to the podium.
I'm Paula Webster. I live at 425 West Euclid. That's across from the property. My concerns, naturally, you don't want to have more microwaves than you have to have, right? And I've been trying to do my due diligence and try to figure out the power density and our location, which is roughly 400 feet from the tower. And I asked Mr. Andrews, for the information that he has, but I don't have the information that I need, and I think the Verizon is the only people who would have that specific information. I do have the height, but I need like power peak, average radiating energy, frequency, and of course now, since I've been listening here, I realize that they may actually be putting more users on the tower, so there might be different frequencies or just more. That is a concern because one of the sheets that was given to me, let's see here, shows that electrical waves are much stronger. Okay, much stronger. And one of the things I thought about that was, if you have a contractor fixing your roof and he's got an extension cord over your roof, you don't think anything out of that frequency because there's not that much power. But when they start, ramping up the power and start putting it on big towers, that's when the problem is the power and the density of the waves from a certain distance. So I don't feel like I can even do my due diligence until I know what it is at 400 feet. We are pro-business. We're pro-cell phone. We don't actually have anything against this, except that we would like a better location, ideally, just to minimize exposure. But we can't really say, oh, you don't build it because we got 5 houses across the street. We don't know how far these microwaves go. They don't stop at 400 feet. We're wondering if maybe you should extend the notification area, the protest area, except the protest line, not a microwave line. And there are no children that live on the block, okay? But in the very next block, there's 200 growing boys. And I think someone should do due diligence because, those, whatever effect there is, and I don't even know if there's hardly any. As far as I can figure from what little I got, actually from these sheets, okay, is that it's like standing in front of a microwave for 4.3 hours a year. That's all we're getting. And I probably get that much anyway. So I'm not saying that, it's going to fry our eyes like if you were actually close to this tower. But I just want to do my due diligence, and I feel like the people who are most going to be affected are the boys at the school. They're not there for 6 hours a day. Sometimes they're for 6 years or more. I've heard of one boy, I guess the youngest I've ever heard was an 8-year-old boy that lived there for 10 years. So that is probably my greatest concern because, hey, what do? They do the tin foil sheets, if you really wanted to go that way. So that's just, I don't have the information, and there's no way I can get the information except from Verizon. And I'm wondering have you done your due diligence, and do you know what these figures are?
Could you point out which is your house there?
Yes. Right here,
Okay.
right in the middle. There's five houses.
And that's 400 feet.
Oh, they did the I've got the map here.
Okay.
They said it was more of a 400 feet thing, where, may I show you?
It's all right, I just
It just
was,
kind of goes a little bit beyond the parking, you know, in the front yard.
okay.
For clarification on a standard zoning or conditional use case, we go out 200 feet in notification. For a tower, we go out 400 feet
Okay.
in notification, so it has a larger notification area than other types of applications. Just because depending on the height or other things, there could be a larger area impacted than what you might have from a daycare center. So.
Thank you. Anyone else care to address the commission on this matter? Mr. Deschamps, would you care to address the regulatory
Well,
body?
we did provide, you know, some information, some visuals showing the comparisons. You know, Verizon has over 35,000 sites. When you combine that with all the other wireless carriers across the country, you're talking about in the neighborhood of about 150,000. To my knowledge, there's no run on some special disease going, you know, to where everyone's going to some hospital or some clinic or here in, whether it's in this community or anywhere else. The power generated when you make a call, when I believe the neighbor indicated cell user or is familiar with it, or the students at the military school, whom in all likelihood every single one is in the wireless business. The power generated when you make a call or a connection to the antenna is equivalent of a light bulb. So I understand, you know, in the past, you know, 10, 20 years ago with high voltage transmission lines and that type of thing, there was a genuine concern. In this case, if there is a concern, it's the power generated by light bulbs. So then if there is a concern, then I think we need to turn the lights down. So.
Is there a federal agency that regulates?
Yes, and you know, again, we're not in the business of being heavy-handed, but I will point out, and Dean can probably substantiate it, that due to the Telecommunications Act, the board really can't even take that into consideration in its
And I shared this with Ms. Webster, was the research we did when we were drafting our ordinance, and I can't give you the full alphabet soup, but EPA, OSHA, ANSI, Electrical Engineers Institute, and several others have all researched this and determined that the wattage from electromagnetic waves from a tower is so low that they present no health risk. And that's as far, there's not a graded scale or anything like that. The conclusion was that there was no health risk. And if you look at the indication there on that graph that's going around, if you are out in the neighborhood by a factor of 100, the exposure is less than somebody who would be working at the tower site themselves. So the maximum exposure, if you were working at the tower site itself, is still 20 times less than a microwave oven in your kitchen.
And I apologize, I should have mentioned also, and I'd be happy to supply you, ma'am, with a link to the FCC website regarding safety, so for further amplification.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we table applications SP 10-1 and 10-2 until we receive an inventory and map of existing cell towers. And in the case of application 10-1, written permission or written acknowledgement at least from the PACES as to the issue of easements, and then a written signed confirmation from the Vandervoort Trust that their property can be used in that way. And if there's something else, I'll add that.
In regards also to the setbacks, that they're clear on the setbacks.
Right.
Distances.
Yeah, I think she would, by referring to the easements, that would refer to the basically the closeness to the Pace property on two sides.
Right.
We would do our best as quickly as possible to get Mr. Pace in here and get him to address that directly with us. And then in the case of that, we have the original application, and we'll create a space for Mr. Vandervoort simply to sign it with his own signature as property owner, and that would suffice for that and the case of Mr. Brown, and we out at the Copper Court site. But I do believe, as is included in your motion, I think if you had an inventory and map of existing towers and the propagation study, I think that would help clarify everything for you and strengthen the case for the need for a tower and in this location.
Also, in the case of application 10-2, there was a question that at the same time they could, Verizon could clear up for the staff about the height of the tower. There's a...
Yeah, I don't know if you looked at that, it was showing both a 120 and a 100-foot elevation.
They're both the same. They should both be 100.
Okay.
Again, I can just apologize to the engineers. Sometimes when they're, like I said, we had over 40 of these going on pretty much at the same time, and they must have lifted the monopole from,
Right.
I think it was the McPherson, which had the exact that height, and they had the 120 instead of the 100.
That's fine. It just needs to be cleaned
Sure,
up. And,
sure.
Yeah, we'll get that clarified.
Who
But
knows, Mr. Pace may like the added income, and once you get a hold of him, maybe he'd like it on his property instead. So that's a
Excuse me, I would second the motion.
Yeah.
Okay, a motion and a second to table both application SB 10-1 and SB 10-2 in light of getting some more information on this project. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? None being heard, motion carries. Thank you for your comments. Dean?
we will try we weren't trying to avoid the issue, but what I was explaining to Ms. Webster is that from a staff perspective or a neighbor perspective, there's much more documentation out there about high voltage electric transmission lines than about cell towers in terms of electromagnetic waves and things of that nature. So if we were going to be concerned about something, it would be more of a concern about that than it would be the towers. We didn't address it in the report primarily because when the ordinances were being drafted, that was researched and that was not an item of safety concern, at least as far as the published literature goes. But we'll try to clean some of those things up, and did want to clarify on the other site in the 9th Street site, it's far enough away from the airport that there's no FAA involvement. The other site's been reviewed by the airport authority, and it does not interfere, but nonetheless there'll have to be a letter from FAA clearing that tower before that location could be finalized. But we will do our best to get the propagation study and maps, and it's most effective in color, so we'll try to get that to you in color.
Love color. Item number 4, any other matters?
For other matters, we wanted to just kind of update you a little bit. We had a request for a housing project, very similar in scope and character to what you see at reserves at Prairie Glen on South Ohio, but on the site of Hawthorne School. And because of the layout, some of the inefficiencies, lack of elevator shaft, multiple levels, high ceilings, they determined that it wasn't feasible to do something there like was done at Roosevelt Lincoln. So they made the decision to propose demolition because the site worked well and then come back with new development. That was considered by the Heritage Commission. They voted to approve authorization of the demolition. That's subject to a 14-day appeal period, which expires Wednesday at 5 o'clock. We don't have anything submitted yet, but there was inquiries about that. If there is an appeal, that would go to the governing body. What we explained to the Heritage Commission was it was their job to review and make a determination on the case made for demolition. They made that decision. The follow-up action is to approve the plan for what replaces the school. That will come back to you. It may come back to you for an initial look and then a final look depending on the timing of the appeal, but we'll be working with the applicants. Part of that is that there were certain things and representations made about utilizing parts of the existing school, preserving those, working those into the new development that would occur, and it's your job as planning commissioners to make sure that that gets carried out. So the plans for what I would refer to as redevelopment or replacement construction will come to you for review, because the planned commercial district that you approved for that site was for uses inside the existing building, and the plan you approved was that building and surrounding parking. If the slate is wiped clean, then just like reserves at Prairie Glen, they would need to submit a plan for location, layout, parking, landscaping, all those things that you would normally review. So we'll be working with them to get that in front of you, and that will be your part of the that project. So we don't know the exact timing on that, depending on if there is an appeal of the demolition, and that will be coming back. The other thing, which that's on our plate more so than yours, but we have a gentleman that's scheduled a meeting next week to talk about how we view placement of digital billboards along our interstates and perhaps inside the city, and our answer is that it's presently prohibited, but we're working on guidelines for that. But that will probably accelerate the need to get something in place to deal with that. We knew the day would come when they would get to us, but apparently that has come. So.
Yeah. Great. No other business. We are adjourned.
Okay.
No, we approved it a long time ago when that guy bought it. We approved